Hi, I'm Sam.
And I'm Felicia.
Welcome to the Bootleg Book Club podcast.
And this week we are reading Zora Neal Hurston, You Don't Know Us, Negroes, and Other Essays.
Thanks for tuning in. So, to jump right in, let's talk about our author, Miss Zora Neal Hurston, who is a critically acclaimed author. She was born in Alabama, but grew up in Eatonville, Florida, an all-black community, which is very evident in her writing, that she grew up around black excellence because she is not concerned about the white gaze at all, and I really appreciated that about her writing.
Right.
She was a novelist, filmmaker, and anthropologist. She was a student at Howard and then Barnard College. She was married several times over, but did not stay married. And while she was a decorated and well-known writer, even while she was alive, unfortunately, she was never properly compensated and was buried without a headstone until Alice Walker, another great novelist, found the grave and gave her a headstone in 1973. This year, they came out with this collection of essays to honor her work and also to, I would say, revive her presence in the literary community because there's some of her work in here that was not previously published.
Yes, and I'm really happy that this book has come out. I'm really happy that we're able to read it during Black History Month and really give Zora her flowers and give her the due that she deserves because this was a great piece for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, to do a quick book look, as we've done in the past, this book is 451 pages. It is split up into 5 parts. Part 1 is on the folk. Part 2 is on art and such. Part 3 is on race and gender. Part 4 is on politics. And Part 5 is on the trial of Ruby McCullum. This collection of essays, the themes are evident in the titles, but I would say it's race, gender, politics, art, and art, really. For my first question to you, I was going to ask, why do you think they had an entire section just for the Ruby McCullum case?
I think it was really important for this case, the fact that it's a Black woman on trial and she's testifying against a white man. Mm-hmm. I think during this time period, this was the first time it was seen and heard of, especially heard of where Zora Neal Hurston was the person who kind of put it on the map by writing about it, and kind of broadcasting it beyond Florida, because this was a case that happened in the state of Florida and it was pretty popular then. And then from there, it's kind of picked up attention and it still has its attention to this day.
Right. For me, I definitely agree with what you were saying, but I also think that Ruby's case touches on all of the themes that were present throughout the collection and were the titles of the collection, such as race, gender, and politics. I think they were evident in the way that Zora Neal Hurston was writing about the case, but also the community and the influence of that over the case as well, and also the importance of her gender and like what that brought to the case, and of course her race as well. And then I would say the art piece is just Zora Neal Hurston's writing, because it is so, even for newspaper article writing, I thought it was incredibly descriptive and incredibly engaging as well.
Yes, I agree with that. And that kind of goes towards the point of view, looking at what our favorite and least favorite parts of the book were. And for me, I think that was her writing style. It was on both sides for me. Sometimes it was least favorite just because I think it takes time to challenge me, but that's what made me so happy about this, that it was so complex and it was so vibrant in the way she did descriptions and the way that she fully discussed and talked about all the topics she wanted. She kind of wrote with a fearlessness.
Definitely.
Also, I think,
especially for her time, I definitely felt like the words that she was putting out there were definitely fearless, and I can definitely see why other Black artists around that time maybe didn't agree with her, and why she may have ultimately been ostracized. Okay, so to keep going on with our bookmark segment and our favorite and least favorite parts of the books, as well as quotes, do you have one you want to start off with, or would you like me to start?
you can start.
Okay. So we talked about how Zora Neale Hurston did not cater to the white gaze, and I thought the introduction of this book, while dense, gave some incredible insight. And so one thing that I highlighted was that on page 2, and rather than using literature to deflect the white gaze, Hurston maintained that the purpose of the Black writer was both to lift the veil and to allow the Black experience to speak in its own voice in all of its sublime resonance, good and bad, positive and negative. And I feel like it kind of highlights that she wanted Black literature that centers the Black voice, yes, that focuses on the Black voice, that caters to the Black voice, and that is only concerned with telling the truth of the Black voice as well.
I agree. I really like that. It definitely introduces an element in the book later on when she talks about writing. It should be in relation to Black people and not in relation to white people. So
absolutely.
So she goes even further to say that my writing does not need to center white people or be about Black people with white people. You know, we could stand on our own. Absolutely. And that's seen in a lot in her thinking. For me, I just have a small part here would be, first off, he was a whisper, a will to hope, a wish to find something worthy of laughter and song. This is talking about High John the Conqueror. And I just really liked this line of the description here of he was a whisper and a will to hope. Mm-hmm. That just sounded so beautiful to me for her to write that. And it's an indication about something of worthy of laughter and song, talking about slavery, mm-hmm, for Black people and how it was a moment of sorrow, but there are elements where they kind of have hope, mm-hmm, and they have other feelings, you know, that they could draw on that helped them survive.
Absolutely. I also highlighted in that section on page 36, their gift song came back into their memories in pieces, and they sang about glittering new robes and harps, and the work flew. And I specifically noted how she was talking about how they gained comfort in spirituals, which I think we learn about that in school, but she definitely provided a lot more imagery behind all of that in this essay, I would say.
Yes.
I would say, I don't want to call this my least favorite part because I think it was a powerful part and I thought it was very important. And I do know that she actually expands on this essay into a full novel. So this is the essay, The Last Slave Ship, and there is a full novel that was published after her death. It was, I want to say it's been recent, in the last 10 years, but it is her, like, the history of the last slave, like the last slave that was brought on a slave ship. But anyway, I just would say it was difficult to read because it talks about, you know, his village being conquered, their king losing his life, and them, you know, really trying and ultimately being overpowered, and sadly ultimately being overpowered by another African tribe that would go on to actually sell them into slavery. And it's again another one of those things, like, we read about it in history, but again, to read it in her just very descriptive, vibrant voice, it was difficult to read, I would say.
Yes, I think that also is part of my least favorite, having to read this bitterness, mm-hmm, within history. I think it's necessary and it's something you have to get through, but at the end of the day, it's difficult.
Yeah.
It really hurts to have to read this and confront this reality.
Yeah, but I think it was very important and powerful that it was added to this collection for sure.
Yes.
Even though I do know that the full novel has been released.
Okay. So going further in depth now, this is the part of our spoil alert. Not extremely, because this is set in essays, so there's a lot of content, but just heading into our deep dive. And for me, my question would be, did you enjoy the style and the segments that the editors kind of created for us within the book?
I do. I know they, like, towards at the end of the book, they put, like, how you can read it in chronological order. Mm-hmm. But I actually did appreciate that it was kind of put together in subjects and pieced together that way. I would say mostly because in a collection of essays, I think it's already difficult to follow along when you don't have, like, one story that you're following. Yeah. So it helps to at least know or have the expectation that, okay, this group of essays is going to be about this. This group of essays is going to be about that. Like, I think that in itself was helpful. But as I said, the editors did put a list in the back of the book where you could read it in chronological order if you wanted to.
Yes, I agree. I overall liked the style and the themes that were selected. I think they did a really good job putting it together for having certain topics. I think I am a person, I like or prefer chronological order in general, though, because I think it comes with history. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes I had to go back and forth and to say, well, what is Zora seeing? What is she thinking about during this time period that would invoke such a feeling to write this? Right. I think that content wasn't exactly there, and it wasn't at the forefront of my mind until I realized there was a timeline in the back. Right. So having that, though, was really helpful.
If you could start over, or if you could go back to before you read this book, would you have read it in chronological order versus the order the editors put it in?
Chronological order.
Oh,
yes,
wow, okay.
If I could.
Okay.
Yes. And I think it's just because the history part is really important to see, especially for the Ruby McCollum case, where it is at the end, and that's probably the one piece that is at the very end, because of that's the end of the years too for that writing, where everything does come all together. All the pieces she's been writing, all the voice that she has about Black culture kind of coming together. You need that history in order, I think.
Okay.
So let's kind of go down through breaking down each section, starting with On the Folk.
Okay. So we kind of talked about High John to Conqueror, and we talked about the last slave ship. So I believe characteristics of Negro expression is still in On the Folk. I thought this was a beautiful section because it kind of gave insight to what you were saying just earlier, the history of our people and the history of our mannerisms and how that plays itself out even in today's age. Yes. And it was so incredible to see that she picked up on that even back then. Because I think it's something that's still happening today, but she clearly picked up on way back when. So, for example, she says, language is like money. The Negro thinks in hieroglyphics. And if I'm not mistaken, there's actually been studies that show that Afro and Caribbean cultures, they speak and they think in story form. Yes. So I thought that was so incredible that she was picking up on these pieces like way back then, like before any of this like research or study like had really come out. Like she's already piecing this together. I thought that was just incredible. And also, I will say, she said, the Negroes, this is page 49, the Negro's greatest contribution to the language is the use of metaphor and simile, the use of the double descriptive, the use of verbal nouns. She's giving credence to legitimizing, valuing what some have called Ebonics or AAVE, African American Vernacular English. I think she is showing that there is a structure to it.
Yes.
Even like just in her way of describing it. I thought that was very, very interesting and powerful.
I think she also shows that there's structure, and she also shows that this has influenced the English language. Yes. And the way everybody else in the world speaks, meaning that she's looking at how the culture contributes to the overall American society altogether, where it does advance it. She talks about how it, not just for the English language within metaphor, but it took dancing, it took food preparation, it took medicine, and the way that it was practiced, it was altered and changed within the Black community, and now it's used and seen in legitimate elements now, and recognizing that it also came from Black people.
Yes. Speaking of things that come from Black people and Black culture, she speaks on something else that I think we also see today. On page 63, she says, speaking of the use of Negro material by white performers, it is astonishing that so many are trying it, and I have never seen one yet entirely realistic. They often have all the elements of the song, dance, or expression, but they are misplaced or distorted by the accent falling on the wrong element. Everyone seems to think that the Negro is easily imitated, and when nothing is further far from the truth. Without exception, I wonder why the blackface comedians are blackface. It is a puzzle. My goodness, if someone published something that said something like this today, I would be like, you're right. Like, yes, absolutely. I think we see that. And we talk about that. I think we've put a name to it in today's society as far as appropriation, but it is so true. Like, you just cannot imitate Black culture as a white person or just as a non-Black person. I think we're even seeing it in K-pop nowadays. Like, yes, you may have the dance moves, but you will never have the true rhythm of a Black creator or a Black artist, I think, in my personal opinion. I thought that was very powerful.
Yes, I think Zora also talks about you may know the show, but you don't know the life. And that is the key to it, of knowing the Black life and the full experience of being Black. And that's where, like, the difference comes from.
Right. And I would also say, in terms of appropriation, the frustration that Zora Neal Hurston had back then, I think, is evident today, and she would even have it today. And I think another thing is that she talks about in the essay, You Don't Know Us Negroes specifically, she is specifically saying the writing of this era is fake.
Yes.
She is specifically calling out, she is saying the way you guys are writing about Black people is fake. It's not butter. It's margarine. It's not real. You are not telling the truth of our stories. And that's what I think the quote that you were just saying, that they've seen our shows, but not our lives. You don't have the lived experience, and you cannot write our stories, period. Right. Yeah, I thought that was awesome.
And I think that leads to the second part, which is on the art and such. Mm-hmm. And where it leads to, for me, is this understanding that Black people are not simple. There's a complexity to Black culture that during this time they see it as so simple that I could imitate it, right? But you can't. There's so many variety, differences, and diversity even within being Black. And I think that's also where the fearlessness comes in her writing, where Zora's not afraid to critique other Black people.
Right,
you know, she's not just calling out white writers or non-Black writers. She's also calling out Black writers who are giving these pieces of writing that it's not real. It's not better.
It's not real, and it's feeding into the white gaze.
Yes.
And it's not being true to the Black voice.
Yes.
Right. And she also says something that, again, highlights things that are happening today, I feel like.
Yes.
And I think we're starting to see a shift, but I don't know. But she basically in what white publishers won't print. She's talking about how there are certain types of Black stories that get published and certain types of Black stories that don't get published. Yes. And the ones that don't get published are the ones where we are just living our everyday lives, where we are falling in love, etc., etc. Exactly. And I think that goes to show in today's society and the art that we see today. Insecure was a huge success.
Yes.
And it was this awkward girl living her life. And I think there was this idea that Black people can't just be. They can't just exist and like that show and that be entertaining. And we see today that that was wrong because that was a hugely, hugely successful show. And I remember reading interviews of Issa Rae and her saying that she wanted there to be a show about Black people's lives that could like be boring, but there is comedic relief in that, you know what I mean? And she brought it back to like Seinfeld, where it was like almost like everyday things happening, but finding the funny in the everyday thing, you know? And I just feel like here, that's what Zora Neal is really getting at. She says on page 144, publishing houses and theatrical promoters are in business to make money. They will sponsor anything that they believe will sell. They shy away from romantic stories about Negroes and Jews because they feel they know the public indifference to such works unless the story or play involves racial tension. And it's just like, that's unfair because our lives are not just dealing with racism. That is one part of it, but we are people beyond our race. And I just, I definitely feel that way. I also felt her stance is clear on page 148. It is inevitable that this knowledge will destroy many illusions and romantic traditions which America probably likes to have around, but then we have no record of anybody sinking into a lingering death on finding out that there was no Santa Claus. The old world will take it in stride, the realization that Negroes are no better nor no worse, and at times just as boring as everybody else, will hardly kill off the population of the nation.
Yes, I totally agree with that. She also says things along the lines of how we are more than sorrow and trauma. And I think that goes back to today where people are looking for Black joy. Yes. And looking at these stories, like you said, Insecure, that are showing and expressing other feelings than Zora also says the race problem,
right,
you know?
Right.
So looking at other concepts. And I think that also goes towards placement, where kind of going back to the culture and art, there was a placement part of looking at a space and atmosphere and what also made it Black.
Right.
She had a part where, food alone doesn't make the atmosphere of the restaurant that they were sitting at. So it's all these other characteristics of interaction that you're looking at and looking for and getting from Black communities.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So next.
Yeah.
Yeah. On race and gender was the next one.
I don't want to skip anything. So did you want to talk about the Howard University essay? Because I was going to talk about the 10 Commandments of Charm.
We could talk about the Howard University essay a little bit. Yeah. I really liked the part just showing student activism and going back to showing that Black people are not monolithic.
Absolutely.
Where they are going against I don't know what you would say for universities, the president, right? Of saying, we don't want to sing the spirituals anymore. And he thought, and he assumed that, oh, of course you love singing these spirituals. But I guess there was, since that pushback, it was kind of really opened the door to see how students at Howard are different and they think differently, and they should have a voice that is heard.
Right. I definitely see what you're saying about having a voice that is heard, but I kind of took another perspective, and I kind of considered, well, why are you shamed of your past? Like, your ancestors were very strong to have made it, so far. And these are spirituals that, we, like what we talked about, comforted them, helped them. And I definitely see what you're saying about activism, but I also was like, you know, there's no need to be ashamed of this music, and to see it in a negative light, I felt like.
Yes. I also think, though, there was parts of maybe it was shame, but also I think in the writing it kind of expressed not to be pigeonholed into this one idea again of what Black should be.
Okay, I hear you. The reason why I brought up 10 Commandments of Charm was because, in all honesty, I was like, is this supposed to be sarcasm?
Right.
I was like, what is going on here? It felt like it didn't fit who Zora was, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And it's basically the 10 Commandments of what a woman should be. And I just was...
And how to get a man.
And it just didn't seem to really fit in with the type of person that she was. And I guess, that's why I brought it up. I was like, is it supposed to be ironic? Is it sarcastic? Like, what did you think?
I think it was the part where this is part of her socialization, during that time of she's probably getting a lot of pushback now as a writer, not being an individual, and saying that, well, what about the man? Because she's going through a couple husbands by now with this piece. So I think it's something that she's reflecting on of, this is what I'm supposed to be.
Or what I should have been to keep companionship, potentially. Yes. I see that. So to move on, this was actually my very, very favorite quote, and this is in the essay, How It Feels to Be Colored Me. And this was page 187. But I am not tragically colored. There is no great sorrow dammed up in my soul, nor lurking behind my eyes. I do not mind at all. I do not belong to the sobbing school of Negrohood who hold that nature somehow has given them a low-down, dirty deal, and whose feelings are all hurt about it. Even in the helter-skelter skirmish that is my life, I have seen that the world is to the strong, regardless of a little pigmentation more or less. No, I do not weep at the world. I am too busy sharpening my oyster knife. I read that and I was like encouraged. I felt like a burst of energy, and I just felt like being Black is not a curse. It is not something I see. I am proud of my heritage. I'm proud of the ancestry that I come from. And more than that, I am proud of the strength that, I have being a Black woman. Exactly. And I also just was like, I don't feel sorry for this position that I hold in life. And I am ready to do the work to garner my prize, in a sense. And I felt that way by her saying, I am too busy sharpening my oyster knife. And I thought about oysters, and how oysters have the pearls, and you have to kind of really get under to get the pearl. And I just was like, yes, I, as a strong Black woman, I will get my prize and my pearl. And and don't get me wrong, I know that being a strong Black woman, I know that can be seen as a double-edged sword, but I just can say in that moment, reading that quote, I was definitely empowered by that.
Yes, I really loved that too. And along with that, kind of it was two quirky pieces. I also felt like, oh, how does this exactly fit? But she talked about loving your nose. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was also very beautiful about, again, loving being Black. Mm-hmm. This is not looking at it as this is a burden that I'm carrying, but this is really just the skin I'm in, and have I shown it love lately?
Right.
Yes. And that goes also for the pearl and the oyster of just the imagery that Zora writes with.
Right.
And it's just like, how did you put that together?
Yes.
And that was another just lovely piece to read for me of just seeing the beauty in her writing.
Absolutely. Okay.
I also, on race and gender, I wanted to talk about when she talks, her most sorry, I cannot say this.
My most humiliating Jim Crow experience.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to highlight on that because she talks about how this is a situation and an occurrence that happens in the North. And I think that's really big to acknowledge where she's coming from, Eatonville, Florida, from the South, of this well-to-do Black community, and now she's in the North where apparently there's not as much racism, but I kind of experienced the worst
experience of racism of my life in the North, where they tell me it's better than the South.
Yes, and I think that's also prevalent to today, where people say, you know, we don't have the same issues as the South or deep entrenched racism here. It's so much better, where it's just like, this is a false.
Right.
This is something that we need to stop telling these lies and giving these, this just unrealistic ideas about race in America, where really the issue is all around, and that's why we need to address it and have these pieces of writing and recognizing and acknowledging these issues.
Right, and confronting these issues. Absolutely, I agree.
Yes. I think that was the last I had for that section.
Okay. So next we had
on the politics.
Okay.
Yes.
This definitely started getting dense for me around this area, and I was like, "Ooh, this is heavy and a lot," and it was part of the book that I kind of struggled through, I would say. I would say, so starting with Crazy for This Democracy, I think she was highlighting the hypocrisy of America, right?
Yes.
This hypocrisy where we talk about equality and freedom, but it goes back to equality and freedom for who?
Right.
It hasn't been equality and freedom for all. You know, it has not ever been a true democracy in this country. And I think she also highlights, you know, how can there be a democracy and Jim Crow laws in the same country?
Exactly.
It's just not possible. So it must mean that democracy does not exist here. Full stop. And that's what I took from it.
Yes. I also took the idea of how are you providing knowledge to people. It seemed like a lot of instances in this section, especially with voting and voting for democracy or different issues, that they're buying votes in a lot of instances versus educating Black people or making Black people aware of what really can happen for them. And they lie to them and say, you know, we could do this for you. And they're not here to really serve the Black community. They're here to serve white people, again, where it's like, so is this democracy for me?
Right.
And it's not.
It's not. Right.
Yeah.
And then I thought her words against the NAACP were eye-opening, I would say. And I would also say it goes back to Black people are not a monolith. Because the idea of the NAACP for me, at least learning about it, was always like, yeah, this is a great institution for Black people, uplifting Black people, everybody's on board, let's go. But I think she definitely gave a new perspective to it, and I definitely could see and understand what she was basically saying. I don't think Zora Neal Hurston was explicitly against integration necessarily. I think she was against this idea of putting our Black children in spaces where they would be experiencing violence, right? And it's just like, we can have an equal education with Black professors. We just need the proper resources. And I think her point was that we've never truly seen a properly resourced Black school. So who's to say that it couldn't have been equal in a way, and equal in a way where our Black children were not having to experience violence on the daily. I think is the point that she was trying to get at anyway. And I think I don't want to misquote this, so let me look this up. But yes. Martin Luther King Jr. himself said, "I fear I may have integrated my people into a burning house." And that's the only thing that was kind of ringing through my mind as I read Zora Neal Hurston's words on the NAACP. And I think it just highlights that Black people didn't necessarily want to be in classrooms with white people. They just wanted equal access and equal opportunity. And to do that, they had to face violence. And I don't know that that was a fair option either.
Yes. I definitely see that where Zora is challenging the NAACP and my ideas of what is advancement. And she's questioning them and saying, is this advancement to you? Saying we're integrating, but they're being violated. They're experiencing abuse, all of these students, these young people, right, for the sake of integration.
Right.
And I think that I agree where the sense is, I see where Zora's coming from of saying that if we're saying integration is the pedestal, it's the end all be all of everything, what are we now saying about the Black communities that we've built so far, you right, know, that we've done with what we've had right, already, where they kind of made a way out of no way. And I think it's something that we should go back to and honoring and respecting, but it's looking for, where is this eco resources, like right, you were saying.
And I also think, like, she's trying to say there's actually excellence in what Black people have been able to achieve, yes, without, you know, integration, you know, having been capable of reaching and attaining like a certain level of success educationally wise. I thought that was another important thing too. Mm-hmm. And so we have made it to the last section of the book, if I am, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and this is the case of Ruby McCullum, correct?
Yes, it's on the trial.
Okay, on the trial, excuse me.
No, it's the same thing.
Oh, okay. So for me, this was, like I think I mentioned earlier, this was kind of pulling all of the themes in together, and I felt like that's kind of why it was towards the end. But also, I kept having to remind myself, like, this was a real case. Like, this yes, is not another fable or a story or just a abstract political commentary. This is someone's life. This is something that truly happened, and I had to really wrap my head around that as I was reading the Zora Neal's story about everything that was happening.
Right. Yes, I think it was really deep, where this is an account of what's happening for Ruby and the full trial. And also I looked it up also just for extra, and I figured that Ruby actually passed away in 1992.
Oh my goodness. That's when I was born, basically. So
she just to know that, again, this isn't so far removed within generations.
Right, right.
This is very close just for and fresh within American history. And Ruby, as a black woman, an affluential black woman, and what was known as a successful black family, on the surface, she was experiencing abuse from her husband,
right.
Who that people didn't recognize or acknowledge at all, saying that, oh, you're rich, you have all of this, what are you complaining about? And they tried to target her and her character without this trial, which was really heartbreaking. And then to say that the trial, which is against a white man who was a doctor who raped her, and she killed him because, you know, you raped me, and
it was multiple times, and she had multiple children,
had a child from him. He didn't really go into details, and you don't really know if she wanted to keep the child, but it is kind of said that he forced her to have the child overall, because she was saying, what are the options, and she wasn't given options in that sense.
And I do believe she hit her breaking point because she was about to have another child by him. And I also feel like what you were saying about the community, you could tell lacked sympathy for her situation.
Exactly.
And it was also interesting, and Zora definitely picked up on this, that they can acknowledge that she had wealth. They can acknowledge that she had this place in society. And yet they were trying to make the trial about money and not about the abuse that this woman was going through.
Right.
Which was like, the lines are not connecting. The dots are not like, things are not being properly pieced together here. Like, we're not seeing the underlying story. And I think, like, on purpose, that they didn't want to see this underlying story, right?
Right.
So.
And then you have a black woman who's at the center of it, but her trial is for the prosecutor, a white lawyer, for the judge, a white lawyer, for the jury, all white men. So it's all white men kind of who have this chance to speak or actually listen and make decisions within the case.
Right.
When it came to Ruby having the opportunity to be on the stand, her voice was silenced. You know, they were interrupting her. They were objecting all throughout the trial. So even that alone, reading about it, it's like they put her on the stand, but to just be seen and not heard. And that also was very heartbreaking to see that nobody actually sees anything wrong with this. They were just going through the motions.
Right. Yeah. And I think that actually speaks to, like, the black woman experience sometimes, right? Like, we're put on a pedestal, like, you know, strong black woman, black queen, you know, all this stuff. But, like, our true feelings are never really heard, I don't think. I think it takes a lot before anyone really listens to us, really believes what we're saying. And I feel like, again, like, you see that theme kind of play out in the way that Zora Neal Hurston writes about this account and this trial. I do think it was interesting that she almost seemed to have some respect for the judge in the beginning of the trial. And then towards the end, you see her kind of lose that. And I would say that in the sense that, like, he was trying to make it seem like he was going to have a fair trial. Like, oh, I don't want this to play out in the newspapers first. Like, let's make sure she gets a chance at a fair trial. And then towards the end, you see Zora Neal Hurston says, my disillusionment was terrible. My faith had been so strong. And I think she's just talking about initially, like, she had faith in that this trial could go the right way because they were talking about being fair. And then ultimately, like you said, they ignored evidence. They ignored her voice. and it just didn't seem like it was fair in the end.
Yes, he made a lot of promises and he had the right words to use, but when it came to action, no action was really done that helped Ruby and Black women. And I think that's also something for today in general. And I think Zora kind of talks about that throughout the book also, where there's art, there's community, there's all of these sources of expression. But when it comes to actually experience and life, that's where it matters, with the actions of people.
And I think it also highlights why we shouldn't be doing anything towards the white gaze, because at the end of the day, they can say all these words, pretty it up as much as they want to, claim that they support, but at the end of the day, they're not doing anything to help move the culture forward, to help move Black people forward. They often just want to be seen as if they're doing the right thing and kind of exploit that idea that they are doing the right thing, basically, and that they are helping, but they're really not.
Yes.
So
what a deep dive.
Yes, that was a pretty deep dive into the book. So to finish this out, I would say, is there anything that you felt like you wanted the editors to add, take away? Do you feel like, for me, I was going to ask, do you feel like this maybe could have been split up into like different books, or do you think it is right to have it all together, or what do you think?
I think it's right to have it all together. I think that pretty much it's an anthology, you know, having this resource now all together. It's something I do want to take more time to read each piece, but I think that goes towards having this access to it was so needed, and it shows for this type of having this representation within writing in one place just helps as a reader.
Right. I would only say for me, the introduction, I felt like maybe it gave away too much, or that ultimately I feel like it made the collection of essays feel like it was going to be denser than it really was.
Okay.
That's all I would say.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else before we wrap up?
Nothing else. I think this was great.
Yes. Okay. Well, you'll have to follow up on our Instagram and our blog to find out our official rating. But for now, thanks for watching and listening. And please make sure you go like and follow us on all of our social media platforms, and check out our website, like I said, for the official review.
Yes.
All right. Thanks. Bye, guys.
Bye.